In some towns, all it takes is one wrong look and you're out. But sometimes, all it takes to remind folks what it means to be human is a hot cup of black coffee. Welcome to Heartland Stories. I'm Ethan Hale, and here I share true stories about honor, kindness, and quiet strength. Today's story starts with a simple cup of coffee, but ends with 200 bikers breaking through the walls of small-town prejudice. Ready to hear how one woman changed a whole town just by standing up for a stranger? Then hit that like button, and let's begin. The rich scent of old drip coffee hung in the air, like it was trying to prove the diner was still alive. Meg Barkley wiped the sticky counter for the third time that hour, not even looking at what she was cleaning. Automatic, monotonous, silent. Outside, same as it had been for months, a deserted street, the faded sign of the old auto shop across the road swaying in the wind like a ghost from better days. In the corner, the wall clock ticked, not so much keeping time, as reminding you how slow it crawls when you're waiting for the day to surprise you. And it never does. Meg glanced at the calculator and the envelope sticking out of her purse. The red "Final Notice" stamp bled through the paper. Electric bill. This month, it might be her last. She tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and whispered under her breath, "Just a couple more months. Just hold on a little longer." But she didn't believe herself. She'd been repeating that line for almost 2 years, ever since her father's stroke put him in a nursing home and left her inheriting a diner on life support. Everything that used to be her life, nursing shifts in Chicago, the apartment overlooking the lake, the noise, the street cafes, the sunrise coffee in a paper cup, all of it was back there, in the past. Here, it was greasy tables, torn linoleum, and the kind of autumn chill that crept in through every crack in the door. An old ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, doing about as much good as the radio in the corner, playing so low it blended in with the hum inside her skull. Meg straightened up, dropped the rag, and looked toward the door. Empty. Again. Only 8 people had come in since morning. Half of them took their food to go. The whole town had gone quiet. The plant cut the night shift. Shops were shuttering one after another. It wasn't just businesses the banks were burying. It was hope. She stepped up to the window and looked out at the empty street. There was a time when Barclays was the heart of Bloomfield. Now, it was just an old sign folks barely looked at, let alone felt anything for. Meg sighed and walked back behind the counter. Reached for the coffee pot like she'd done 1,000 times. The doorbell was still silent, but she knew, sooner or later, someone would walk in. And that's when everything would start. The bell over the door gave a sharp jingle, not the usual chime, but something tighter, like even it could feel the balance about to shift. Meg looked up from the coffee pot. There he was. A man, tall, solid, like he'd been carved out of asphalt and hard miles. Leather jacket worn down by wind and time. His shoulders pulled tight, like they were holding more weight than just his own. Dust-covered, weathered face. And the way he stood in the doorway, it felt like the world inside the diner and the one outside were 2 battlefields, and he was stuck between them. But it wasn't the man that hit her first. It was the patch on his back. A coiled snake with open fangs. Steel serpents. The town knew that symbol. Or at least, they thought they did. She caught Mrs. Brooks at the nearby table clutching her purse like it could shield her from whatever she feared. The boys from the auto shop froze mid-bite, forks in the air. One didn't even blink, like moving might draw attention. Even the radio in the corner seemed to hush itself. The stranger could feel every stare. He didn't look for a spot near anyone. Walked all the way to the far end of the counter. Stopped. Set his hands on the back of a stool. Paused. Then sat down a slow, quiet, eyes locked on the empty air in front of him. Meg wiped her hands on her apron, grabbed a glass and a menu. There was a knot in her gut, not fear. More like a strange certainty. This man hadn't come to cause trouble. He'd come to escape it. And it looked like the town wasn't ready to let him. Jenny, the other waitress, disappeared behind the condiment shelf, suddenly deeply invested in rearranging ketchup bottles. Meg walked over to him. "Welcome to Barclays," she said, steady as a heartbeat, placing a water glass and menu in front of him. "Today's special is meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Just came out of the oven." The man looked up, eyes pale, worn out, bloodshot. But in those eyes, there was something that didn't match the rough frame he came in. Softness. Sadness. A quiet kind of pain. Coffee, he said softly, almost like it hurt to speak. Black. And whatever's quickest from the kitchen. Been on the road since dawn. His voice was low, gravelly, but not threatening. He wasn't asking for pity. Wasn't looking for sympathy. All he wanted was a cup of coffee and a minute of peace. Meg nodded, noticing how his fingers trembled just slightly when he reached for the glass. Back behind the counter, she picked up the coffee pot again, but this time it felt different. One thing was clear. This man hadn't come in as a symbol or a biker. He came in as a man, and that meant he at least deserved a cup of black coffee. The old percolator poured slow, almost lazy, like it understood the weight of the moment. Meg watched him from the corner of her eye as the steam rose from the mug. He didn't move, but his whole body looked like it was holding itself together, like even the smallest slip might crack through the shell he'd built around himself. She walked over and set the cup in front of him. Fresh pot. Just finished brewing, she said, keeping her voice level. Nothing special. Just normal. He gave a small nod and wrapped his hands around the mug, hands that were rough, work-worn, still trembling just a little. The coffee wasn't just a drink. It was an anchor. The warmth of the ceramic seemed to pull him back into the world. His fingers twitched, and Meg saw it. One hand, scraped knuckles. The other, a white plastic wristband peeking from under his sleeve. She knew that kind. Too well. For a while, silence. Then he spoke, still staring into his cup. Heading back to Riverside, he said slowly. To my daughter. He stopped, but his voice lingered in Meg's head, like it had left something behind. She didn't ask what was wrong with his daughter. She didn't need to. It was in his eyes. The fear. The fatigue. That deep, hollow ache only familiar to people who've sat through long nights, waiting for bad news. He tried to add something. She's. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he just nodded, like he was confirming the truth to himself, even if he couldn't say it out loud. Meg felt something stir inside her. Not pity. He wouldn't want that. It was recognition. Shared pain. That same waiting. That same quiet from the far end of a hospital hallway. I'll get you eggs and toast, she said gently. Fastest thing in the kitchen. 6 minutes, tops. He didn't speak, just dipped his head, barely. But in that small motion, there was gratitude. Not for the food. For the silence. As Meg turned to put in the order, she could feel it, all the eyes in the room on her. The air had thickened, tight like a rope pulled at both ends. At the back table, Mrs. Brooks leaned in close to her friend, whispering something sharp with a worried glance. Both women nodded and looked away, but not really. Their eyes still drifted toward the counter. The guys from the garage, who just moments ago were arguing over Sunday night football, had gone silent. Now they just chewed. Like that somehow helped them avoid the tension. Meg had seen this before. Small towns don't take kindly to outsiders, especially when there's a snake with fangs on their back. Jenny never returned to her spot. She was still busy at the condiments shelf, rearranging ketchup bottles like it was a matter of life and death. Once, Meg caught her eye. It was anxious, almost afraid. Jenny looked away fast. The radio still played, but the song felt miles away. Like the whole place had been wrapped in a thick silence, broken only by the clink of forks on plates and the lazy creak of the ceiling fan overhead. Meg drew a deep breath. She knew what it felt like to be at the center of other people's judgment. But she also knew this. Sometimes, all you can do is hold their gaze, even if it cuts like a blade. Behind the counter, the man kept sipping his coffee in silence. His face looked calm, but his shoulders told a different story, stiff, braced, like he could feel every unspoken word hanging in the air. Meg went back to her work, and with every step, she reminded herself. At Barclays, everybody gets a chance, no matter what they're wearing. The bell over the door rang again, sharp this time, confident. The sound carried weight. 2 in uniform walked in, Officers Hank Doyle and Marty Sloan. Regulars. Most days, they joke, say hey, grab 2 coffees, and settle into their usual spot by the window. But today, their steps were different. Hard. Purposeful. Like they were answering a call, not ordering lunch. Hank spotted the biker first, nudged Marty with his elbow, nodded toward the counter, and walked forward with a kind of practiced ease. Well, look who rolled into Bloomfield, he said loud enough for the room to hear. Been a while since we've seen one of your kind, friend. Marty said nothing, but slid into the stool on the other side of the man, flanking him like it had been planned. The biker didn't look up, kept drinking his coffee, slow, focused. But the tension in his back deepened. Just passing through, he said, calm, low voice. No threat, but no fear either. Stopped in for a bite. Sure, a bite, Hank smirked. Maybe sell a little something while you're here? Or stash a stolen ride out back. Meg stepped up with a plate, eggs and toast. Simple. She set it in front of the man and looked directly at Hank. Something for you, officers? She asked, her tone dry as dust. Not yet. Just doing a little check, Hank replied, turning back to the biker. How about some ID, friend? Want to make sure you're not the guy from those bulletins we've been getting. The man reached slowly into his pocket. Easy, Hank snapped, hand moving to rest on his holster. A few folks in the diner froze. Even the radio seemed to dim. Meg stepped closer. He's just getting his ID, Hank, she said firmly. And he's a customer. Just like you. He ain't like us, Hank scoffed. His little brotherhood brings baggage, drugs, fights, chaos. We've seen it before, Meg. You don't know who he is. For the first time, the man looked up. His voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath now. All you see is the patch. That's enough. Marty cut in. We should check his bike. Make sure it's not flagged. The customers began to shift. A few nodded in quiet agreement. Others looked uncomfortable, but no one said a word. The man set his fork down on the edge of the plate. His voice trembled. I just wanted a meal before heading to see my daughter. She. He stopped. Eyes dropped. His mouth tightened into a hard line. Oh, here we go, Hank smirked. The sick daughter story. Right out of the playbook. And that's when Meg felt it, something inside her starting to boil over. Too much pain. Too much injustice. All before noon. She stepped forward, placing herself between the officers and her customer. That's enough, she said, steady and loud. Her voice sliced through the room like a blade through fog. You're done here. What did you say? Hank frowned, his eyes narrowing. He hasn't broken a single law, Meg said. He ordered coffee and a plate of food. He's been nothing but polite. Can't say the same for you. She locked eyes with Hank and didn't blink. Or did you walk in here as a threat, not as a customer? Silence. The first real silence in a while. Her heart pounded like a war drum, but her face didn't flinch, because her father taught her one thing above all. Don't judge a man by his uniform. Judge him by what he does. He's my customer, Meg said again, calmer than she felt. And while he's in my diner, he deserves the same respect as anyone else. Hank squinted at her. His fingers slowly backed away from the holster, but his eyes stayed hard, burning. You sure about this, Meg? You know who you're standing up for. I do, she said. A man who just wanted a meal. Not the villain you've painted in your head. Marty cleared his throat, a weak attempt to break the tension. But Meg didn't look away. By now, all fear had drained from her. What was left was just exhaustion, and the values her father drilled into her. Right here, behind this same counter, when she was just a girl serving pies after school. You're forgetting who keeps this town safe, Hank muttered. Your father wouldn't be proud of this. Meg lifted her chin just slightly. My father taught me respect and justice. She turned to the man, to Jim, who'd sat through it all like he barely dared to breathe. And right now, you're violating both. Hank slowly stood up. You're making a mistake, Meg. Small towns remember this stuff. They remember who stood where. He tossed a couple of dollar bills on the counter. Come on, Marty. The doorbell gave a shaky rattle as they walked out. And with their leaving, something shifted. The air got a little lighter. Conversations at the tables slowly came back, tentative, unsure, but alive again. Meg looked over at Jim. He held his cup in both hands, eyes half closed, like what had just happened had drained the last of his strength. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He shook his head. No, not everyone would have done what you just did. He straightened a little, voice firmer now. Thank you, Meg Barkley. Eat before it gets cold, she said with a small smile. I'll go make another pot. Pretty sure we both could use it. She knew the consequences were still coming, but in that moment, she had no doubt she'd done the right thing. Once things settled, and the soft hum of conversation returned to the diner, Jim finished his plate in silence. No rush. Like he wasn't eating food. But the quiet. Meg refilled his cup and walked over. "I'm Meg," she said gently, like picking up a conversation that had never stopped. "Owner of this place." "Sort of, recently." He looked at her. His eyes were steadier now, but still carrying that deep, worn-out ache. "Jim," he nodded. "Jim Merrill." They stood in silence for a moment. The kind of silence people share when there's no need to say much. He pushed the empty cup away, stood up, and reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded 20 and held it out to her. But she shook her head. "Today's on the house." Jim didn't argue. He just set the bill on the counter. Then, "This is for your father." His voice was rough, but honest. Not a gesture of charity. A mark of respect. Meg froze for just a second. He was already turning to go when she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Good luck to your daughter, Jim." He nodded once. "She's fighting. Same as you." And then he left. But he didn't leave behind silence. What he left was something else. Something that hung in the air. Like maybe something important had just happened in that diner. Even if the town didn't know it yet. Meg did. Evening settled over Bloomfield in soft gray light, filtering through the windows of the nursing home. The room smelled of medicine and old wood. Outside, bare maple branches swayed in the wind, casting slow-moving shadows on pale walls. Meg sat beside the bed, holding her father's hand, thin, veined, but still warm. He lay still, his eyes unfocused, lost somewhere between light and shadow. The doctor said he probably understood more than he could show. He just couldn't respond. "Today was a hard day, Dad," she said softly, leaning in. "Real hard." She ran her fingers gently along his hand, like she used to do when he'd wait in the car during her after-school practices. "I stood up for someone. A stranger. He came in, just wanted a meal. But if you'd seen the way people looked at him. Like he wasn't even a person. Like he was a mistake." Her voice shook. But she didn't cry. She just held his hand tighter. The cops came. Started pressing him, trying to scare him. And I couldn't stay quiet. I told them this diner isn't here to judge people. That everyone who walks through that door deserves respect. She looked down at the creases in the old bedspread. "I don't know if I did the right thing," she whispered. But staying silent felt worse. The silence in the room grew thick. And then barely there, like a breeze across skin. His fingers moved. Just a twitch. Maybe she imagined it. But in that smallest of gestures. She heard everything she needed to. She smiled through the ache in her chest. "I knew you'd understand." The next morning, Meg showed up at the diner first, same as always. The streets were still half asleep. The air carried that October damp, heavy with the kind of cold that settles in your bones. But something felt off. She walked up to the door and froze. Taped to the glass was a sheet of paper. The edges had started to peel from the rain. But the message was clear, written in thick, angry red marker. "No biker lovers. This ain't their town." Meg stared at the words, like she was trying to figure out who they were meant for. Or more honestly, who they were from. She ripped it down in one sharp motion, crumpled it in her hand. But the feeling stuck to her fingers. Like the message had soaked in deeper than just the window. Inside, everything looked the same. Cups lined up. The coffee maker gurgling with its stubborn rhythm. But the air was different now. Heavier. Colder. She flipped on the lights, checked the pantry, the fridge, the back door. Nothing touched. No damage. Just the sign. A warning. The first hour passed in silence. Usually by breakfast time, a couple of regulars would have wandered in. Mrs. Brooks with her oatmeal. Dave with his bacon toast and small talk. But today, nothing. Only the clock ticking, breaking the stillness between hope and disappointment. By noon, only 2 people came in. The first was Carol Brooks. She left her usual tip and, without meeting Meg's eyes, said quietly, "This'll blow over, Meg. People just get scared. Don't take it personal." The second was Dave, the same Dave who used to argue baseball over eggs. He sat at the window, right where everyone passing by could see him. "Let him look," he said loud enough for the room. "Coffee's still the best in town, Meg." She smiled, thanked him, but she knew. A couple of familiar faces didn't cancel out the silence that had taken hold. By day's end, the bell over the door had barely made a sound. Meg counted the register, already knowing the answer. If things stayed like this for another week. She wouldn't make rent. And all because of one cup of coffee. One choice. One moment when she refused to stay quiet. The cafe clock read just past 2 when the doors swung open again. Meg didn't even look up at first. Another to-go order, maybe a regular coming back. But the footsteps were different. Measured. Steady. When she turned, she saw a man in his 50s, jeans, worn leather jacket, blue t-shirt. Beside him stood a woman about the same age. Silver braid tied back neat. Her eyes calm, watchful. "You Meg Barkley?" the man asked as he stepped closer. "I am," she replied, cautious but polite. He extended a hand. "Rod Merrill. This is my wife, Carol. We're Jim's brother and sister-in-law." Meg understood instantly. That Jim. The biker from the Steel Serpents, who just wanted a cup of coffee and a little peace yesterday. "He told us what happened," Carol said. "He would have come himself, but he's still at the hospital. With Ellie, his daughter." Meg asked. Rod nodded. "She's got cancer. Stage 4. They're in Riverside, trying some kind of experimental treatment. It's the last shot they've got." Meg felt her chest tighten. She'd already suspected something. But hearing the words, hearing them without any cushion of hope, hit different. "Jim said you were kind to him. Said you stood up for him. When no one else would even look him in the eye." Meg shrugged, quiet. "I just did what felt right. It's nothing special, just not letting people get torn down for no reason. Or at least, it shouldn't be. In a perfect world, maybe," Carol said gently. "But these days, that's a choice. And one that comes with a price. We can see it." Meg glanced around. At the empty tables. At the windowsill where her father's plant had started to wilt. He'd planted it last spring. "People are scared," she said. "And now, I guess, they're scared of me too. Maybe it's time someone reminded them what happens," Rod said. "When somebody isn't." There was something in his voice. A steadiness. And in his eyes. A promise. Change was coming. Whether the town was ready or not. Meg was wiping down the window table when she heard it. A low rumble in the distance. At first, she thought she imagined it. The sound was deep, distant, like thunder rolling in slow. But it kept building, growing louder, filling the street with a steady rhythm. Then came the first motorcycle. Then a second. Then 5 more. Meg froze with the rag in her hand and stepped out from behind the counter, staring through the glass. What she saw made no sense. From both ends of the street, a procession of bikes rolled toward Barclays. Dozens, no, hundreds. They filled the road, the parking lot, even the empty lot next to the old service station. Some idled. Some crept forward slowly. Engines growled like a storm. But this wasn't a storm of anger. There was something else in it. Something deeper. One by one, the bikers pulled off their helmets. They nodded to each other, calm, collected. Men and women. Young and old. Bearded, clean-shaven. Tattooed, plain-faced. Many wore Steel Serpent's colors, but others sported different patches, different crests, different clubs. One shared purpose. Rod and Carol walked in after them quietly, like they'd just come back from the grocery store. "Jim texted us last night," Rod said. "Told us what happened. Said you did the right thing, Meg. Where we're from, we remember that." "How many are there?" she asked, almost whispering. 217, Carol said with a smile. "We counted." And then the bell over the door rang. Once. Twice. Again. And again. The first bikers to walk and pulled off their gloves, nodded with respect, like she wasn't just the cafe owner. But something more. They ordered coffee, water, eggs, whatever was on the menu. Paid cash. Tipped well. No show. No speeches. Just quiet gratitude. The cafe filled up. Tables taken. People lined the counter. Some waited by the door. No one was loud. No one was pushy. Just respect. Meg stood there, frozen, unsure what to do. Then a tall man with a silver beard stepped inside and offered his hand. "You must be Meg," he said. "I'm Marcus, president of the Riverside chapter of the Serpents. Jim's one of ours." She shook his hand automatically. "Hope you don't mind us stopping in. Jim said your place was welcoming." I don't have enough food for everyone," she breathed. Marcus chuckled. "Already taken care of. Carol called the suppliers, big deliveries coming in 20 minutes. We covered it." Meg looked around, at the packed cafe, the orders, the calm smiles. Why? Why would you all do this? Marcus met her eyes, steady, clear. Because you did the right thing. When it was hard. When it was scary. He gave a quiet nod. And that means more to us than you'll ever know. The bell over the door rang again, softer this time, like it knew who was coming in. Meg looked up from the counter and froze. Jim stood in the doorway. Same jacket. Same heavy boots. But something about him had changed. The weariness was still there. But in his eyes, a light. Something had lifted. Something had cleared. Like the weight on his shoulders wasn't crushing him anymore. Hope you don't mind I brought a few friends, he said as he walked in, a faint smile tracing his lips. It was small, but real. Meg laughed, not loud, but with relief. I think I'll manage. They stood in the middle of it all, voices, coffee, hot plates, clinking cups. Right in the heart of the cafe, folks had been afraid to even glance at yesterday. How's Ellie? Meg asked gently, though her voice carried hope. Jim let out a breath, and it said everything. Doctor called this morning. Treatment's kicking in. Blood work looks better than they expected. First good news we've had in months. Meg felt a lump rise in her throat. She nodded. I'm really happy for you. For her. She wants to meet you, Jim said. I told her what you did. Told her you're one of the rare ones, the kind that doesn't look away. His smile grew a little. She said, You must be just as stubborn as she is. Meg smiled back, warmth spreading in her chest. Tell her I'll come the moment she's ready. And tell her, I've got a soft spot for stubborn people. And in that moment, she knew. None of it was for nothing. The cafe, once hollow and echoing with the ghosts of conversations past, now buzzed like a hive. Meg barely kept up with orders. Ginny was back at her side. And Meg had called in a second girl on short notice. The air was thick with the scent of frying bacon, fresh coffee, and the faint leathery musk of worn jackets. But more than anything, it was full of something real. At the door, a line. At the tables, a steady flow. Those who couldn't fit inside leaned on counters, waited outside, smiled at folks passing by. Every order came with thanks. Every word carried respect. And then, quietly, they started coming in. First was Mr. Wallace, the school principal. He hesitated at the door like he wasn't sure if he belonged. One of the bikers, a young guy with an earring, stood up and pointed at a seat. Teacher, he asked. No, Wallace said, a little awkward. Principal. Even better, the biker laughed. Let's talk school lunches. 5 minutes later, they were deep into a discussion about nutrition programs in elementary schools. Then came Mrs. Brooks, with her knitting tray. She sat down across from a silver-haired biker named Nancy. Within minutes, they were debating quilt patterns. Your stitch is drifting, dear, Mrs. Brooks giggled. It's called artistic expression, Nancy fired back. They both laughed, like they'd known each other 10 years. Then Dave from the garage clapped a hand on the back of an old biker in a worn army beret. Nom, Dave asked. 69, the man nodded. You? 70. Hospital in Da Nang. They didn't speak after that, just sat side by side. Two men, two shadows of war, who'd found each other again after decades. Someone brought out a portable speaker. Music drifted into the street. Easy, southern kind. Kids from the nearby houses came running to see the bikes. They touched the chrome, asked for pictures. No one chased them off. Instead, they were lifted up, set on saddles, told stories, made to laugh. Meg stood at the counter, drying her hands on her apron, watching it all, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. The diner wasn't just a diner anymore. It had become something else. A place where fear gave way to acceptance, where memories of the past shared tables with the hope of what's still to come. And she knew this night would change more than just the town. It would change all of them. The sun dipped low, painting the storefronts and motorcycles in warm gold. The cafe still buzzed, but the conversations had softened, as if everyone could feel something important was about to happen. Marcus, president of the Riverside Steel Serpents chapter, stood in the center of the room and raised a hand. The murmur fell quiet almost instantly. Even the music outside seemed to lower, like someone turned down the volume on the world. I want everyone to hear this, Marcus said. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of steel. This is for everyone in this town. He turned to Meg, who stood behind the counter, clutching her towel like a shield. Meg Barkley showed us what honor looks like. When most turned away, she stayed. When others stayed silent, she said what needed saying. And today, we say it back. He looked around the room. At bikers, townspeople, kids, elders. From this day forward, Barkley's Diner is under the protection of the Steel Serpents. A cheer broke out. Bikers clapped. Someone whistled. A few townsfolk joined in, unsure at first, but with respect. We'll be coming back here, Marcus continued. We'll eat her apple pie. We'll drink her damn strong coffee. And we'll make damn sure no one disrespects her for choosing conscience over comfort. He paused, glancing toward the back table, where Officer Sloan sat, visibly uneasy, eyes lowered. I hope that's clear. There was no thread in his voice, just fact, clean and solid, like motor oil and steel. Meg stood there, unable to speak, and then she just smiled, because in that silent wall of protection was the purest kind of gratitude a person could ever receive. When the last biker left, thanked her for the pie and promised to return. The silence that settled in the diner wasn't the same one she used to know. It wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. The smell of bacon and coffee still lingered in the air. But now, there was something else to it. Hope. Meg slowly closed the cash drawer and pulled out the day's tally sheet. She counted the bills and had to double-check. It was the busiest, most profitable day the diner had ever seen, more than the past 2 weeks combined. She'd emptied the drawer twice to keep it from overflowing. But it wasn't about the money. Not really. She looked around the room. Napkins still scattered. A few empty cups left behind. But even they were part of a new picture. One where a biker and a teacher shared a table. Where a knitting grandma laughed with a tattooed stranger. Where a veteran found common ground with a teenage kid. The diner they tried to boycott yesterday had become a place of healing today. Meg walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, by the curb, a boy with a bike and his little sister stood staring at the chrome bikes still parked from the night before. They waved at her, and she waved back. With a real smile. For the first time in a long while, the town was changing. Not fast, not loud, but it was happening. People saw now that beneath the leather and the helmets were folks just like them. That kindness didn't wear a uniform, and honor didn't need a badge. And that one woman, in one small-town diner, could remind them all of that. She flipped the lights off, leaving only the soft glow of the neon sign. Barkley's Diner. For a moment, she paused at the counter, ran her finger along the rim of a coffee cup. We did it, Dad, she whispered. And I think I'm finally starting to understand why it all mattered. Morning came soft, as if the whole town had taken a breath, trying to make sense of what had happened the night before. Meg arrived a little later than usual, gave herself 10 extra minutes of sleep, but when she reached the front door, she saw something sitting on the steps. A tight bundle, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. No box, no return address, just her name, written in bold, blocky letters. Meg Barkley. She opened it right there on the porch. Inside, a leather vest, clearly custom-made. Sturdy, heavy, smelling of road and wind. Across the back, stitched in a half-circle, Friends of the Serpents. And in the center, the name that stopped her breath. Barkley's Diner. Pinned to the lining was a note, written in a firm, uneven hand. To the bravest diner owner I've ever met. Ellie smiles when I tell her about you. Jim. Meg pressed the vest to her chest. The leather was cold, but something inside her warmed. She stepped inside and gently hung the vest next to her father's apron. Their symbols. Side by side. One built it. The other protected it. Now, this was more than a diner. It was a story, a memory, a choice. Once made, never forgotten. A choice not to stay silent. The bell above the door chimed, simple, routine. But Meg knew that walk right away. Firm, wide. The kind of stride you get from years in uniform. She wasn't surprised when Hank Doyle stepped through the door. No badge today. Just jeans, a worn-out jacket, and a face without its usual edge. He walked up to the counter like he was trying to remember how this place worked. Cup of coffee, Meg, if that's all right. She nodded. Sure. Black. Yeah, like always. They didn't speak while she poured. Then she set the cup in front of him. Sugar's there if you want it. Thanks. He took a sip without looking at her. Only then did his eyes meet hers. You've held this place together, he said. The town feels different. Meg didn't answer right away. Just gave a small smile. The town's made of people, Hank. And each of us decides who we're gonna be. He nodded. Slow. Quiet. And for the first time, he didn't seem proud. He just seemed real. Meg moved back behind the counter. He sat quietly. No excuses. No talk. And she returned to being who she was. The woman her father raised. Judged by actions, not by labels. That was all there ever was. Spring didn't come easy to Bloomfield. But on this day, the air felt especially soft. Sunlight filtered through young leaves. And above Barclay's Diner, the neon sign swayed gently in the breeze. Beneath it, a new hand-painted sign. Home to all. Meg stood at the entrance, drying her hands on her apron. When she saw a beat-up car roll to the curb, it stopped. A girl stepped out, maybe 20. Thin, short blonde hair under a baseball cap, gray hoodie. On her wrist, a slim medical bracelet. She looked at the diner, squinted into the light, and smiled. Meg walked forward to meet her. You must be Ellie, she said, keeping her voice steady. The girl nodded. And you're Meg. Dad talked about you a lot. And honestly, I didn't believe half of it. Until now. Meg didn't hold back. She stepped forward and hugged her, tight. Ellie hesitated, then hugged back. Softly, with a faint tremble. In that embrace was everything. Gratitude, exhaustion, and the kind of connection where a stranger becomes someone who helped save you. Come on, Meg said, stepping aside. We've got fresh apple pie today. They walked to the door together. Above them, the sign swayed gently. Barclay's Diner, home to all. And the town opened itself to one more of its own. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button and subscribe. Every story here is a reminder. A small act of kindness can change the world. Sometimes it's a cup of coffee. Sometimes it's standing up for someone. And sometimes it's a quiet choice to do what's right, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. Take care of each other. And don't be afraid to stand with the ones who need it. Because it's those moments, those quiet stands, that shape what it really means to be human. See you next time on Heartland Stories.